There is a strange moment that happens when you are alone at night. The house is quiet, your phone is face down, but you can still feel its presence beside you. The day is finally over, and for the first time in hours, nobody needs anything from you. And yet, instead of feeling free, you feel vaguely behind on your work, behind on your goals, behind on the person you thought you would become by now. You open your phone, a message, an email, someone you know just got promoted, someone else bought a house, someone you went to school with is traveling the world, someone half your age seems to have built a business, written a book, learned 3 languages, and somehow developed perfect abs before breakfast. And suddenly that quiet room doesn't feel quiet anymore. It feels like an examination room. You begin measuring yourself. Am I smart enough? Am I productive enough? Am I learning fast enough? Am I becoming obsolete? And beneath all of those questions is a deeper one that most people rarely say out loud. What if the world no longer needs someone like me? For most of human history, intelligence was one of the safest things you could possess. If you could calculate, remember, reason, read, organize, analyze, and solve problems, you had something valuable. The smarter you became, the more useful you could become. But something strange is happening now. The machines we are building are becoming extraordinarily good at the very things we spent thousands of years training ourselves to do. They can search faster than you, remember more than you, calculate more accurately than you, route in seconds strange languages, recognize patterns, analyze enormous quantities of information, and increasingly, they can produce things that once seemed uniquely human. Images, music, stories, software, strategies, explanations. So perhaps the most uncomfortable question of the future isn't whether artificial intelligence will become smarter than us. Perhaps it is this. What happens to your sense of worth when intelligence itself stops being rare? Because if your identity has quietly been built around being competent, informed, efficient, educated, or intellectually impressive, the future may feel less like a technological revolution and more like a personal crisis. And this is where the story becomes much more interesting, because humanity has faced something like this before. Not artificial intelligence, something deeper. The loss of an old definition of what it meant to be valuable. For thousands of years, most human beings lived in worlds where physical strength mattered enormously. If you could carry more, hunt better, build faster, fight harder, survive longer, you had an advantage. Then civilization changed. Machines began replacing muscles. A tractor could do the work of dozens of people. A factory could produce what once required hundreds of hands. A crane could lift what no human could. And something remarkable happened. Humanity didn't become worthless. We simply moved the definition of value. Strength became less important. Knowledge became more important. Education became more important. Mental labor became more important. The person who could operate information became more valuable than the person who could simply move objects. So we built schools, universities, corporations, entire economies around the idea that the human mind was the next great frontier. You were told, implicitly or explicitly, that if you learned enough, became educated enough, and developed enough expertise, you would be safe. And for a while, that story worked. But now we are approaching another transition. The machines are moving upward. They are entering the territory we once considered the sanctuary of the human mind. And this creates a peculiar psychological problem. When a machine becomes stronger than you, you can still tell yourself that strength isn't everything. When a machine becomes faster than you can say speed isn't everything. But when a machine begins outperforming you in reasoning, memory, pattern recognition, writing, coding, and analysis, what exactly do you have left? The answer may be far more beautiful than most people realize, because perhaps we have misunderstood what makes a human being valuable in the first place. The modern world has trained you to think of yourself almost like a machine. Your resume becomes a list of capability. Your education becomes a collection of credentials. Your career becomes a measurement of output. Your productivity becomes a moral virtue. Even your hobbies can become optimization projects. You don't simply run. You track your pace. You don't simply sleep. You measure your sleep score. You don't simply eat. You count the calories. You don't simply read. You track how many books you finished. You don't simply live. You optimize. And beneath this obsession is an old industrial idea. A good human being is an efficient human being. But what happens when machines become infinitely better at efficiency? What happens when the machine can work 24 hours a day without boredom? Write 10 versions of the report while you're still opening the document. Remember every detail of every conversation and instantly compare millions of possibilities. Maybe the future doesn't reward the person who behaves most like a machine. Maybe it rewards the person who remembers how not to. That possibility takes us somewhere much older than Silicon Valley. Long before computers existed, human beings were already wrestling with the problem of intelligence. The ancient Greeks didn't simply ask how much a person knew. They asked what kind of person should possess knowledge. Socrates was obsessed with the recognition of ignorance. The Stoics asked what was actually within our control. Buddhist traditions explored the strange relationship between awareness and attachment. Nietzsche questioned inherited values and warned about what happens when people allow external systems to determine what they should become. Carl Jung explored the parts of ourselves we would rather not see. Different civilizations used different languages, but they kept circling the same mystery. Knowing more does not automatically mean becoming wiser. And perhaps this distinction is about to become one of the most important distinctions of the century, because information is becoming abundant. Intelligence is becoming cheap, but wisdom remains difficult. A machine can tell you what happened. It may eventually become extraordinarily good at predicting what will happen. But there is another question. What should matter to you? That question is different. It isn't solved by more processing power. It is a question of values. And values are strange things. You don't discover them in a database. You live them. You suffer for them. You revise them. Sometimes you inherit them from your parents. Sometimes you spend 20 years rebelling against them, only to realize that you secretly carried them with you the entire time. Sometimes you discover what you truly value only after losing something you thought you could never live without. This is why intelligence and wisdom are not the same thing. Intelligence can help you get somewhere. Wisdom asks whether you should go there. Intelligence can optimize a strategy. Wisdom asks whether the goal is worth pursuing. Intelligence can help you win an argument. Wisdom may tell you that winning the argument will damage a relationship you care about. And that distinction matters because the human brain was never designed simply to solve abstract problems. It evolved inside relationships, inside tribes, inside uncertainty, inside danger. Your nervous system is constantly asking questions that have nothing to do with mathematics. Am I safe? Do I belong? Can I trust this person? Am I being rejected? Does my life have meaning? What happens to me if I fail? These questions can overwhelm even the most intelligent person on earth. You can have a brilliant mind and still sabotage your relationships. You can understand behavioral psychology and still repeat the same destructive pattern every 6 months. You can read hundreds of books about discipline and still avoid the one conversation you're terrified to have. You can know exactly what you should do and remain unable to do it. Why? Because knowing and changing are different neurological events. The brain doesn't simply operate like a spreadsheet waiting for better information. It is a living system shaped by emotion, memory, habit, reward, fear, attachment, and prediction. Your conscious mind may say, I know this relationship is unhealthy. But another part of you may be saying, leaving means being alone. Your conscious mind may say, I don't care what people think. Meanwhile, your nervous system notices every unread message, every social comparison, every sign that you might be excluded. Your mind can understand an idea long before your body learns to believe it. And that may become one of the great advantages of humans in the coming age. Not our ability to know everything, our ability to become someone. Because becoming is not the same thing as computing. There is a difference between receiving an answer and being transformed by an experience. You can read every book about grief, but when you lose someone you love, no book can experience the silence of the room with you. You can study courage. But eventually, life will ask you to do something frightening. You can understand forgiveness intellectually. But then someone will hurt you deeply, and suddenly, forgiveness becomes a completely different subject. This is where philosophy stops being decoration and becomes survival. Marcus Aurelius wrote in a world filled with war, disease, political instability, and personal loss. His world was brutally different from ours, and yet his central problem was familiar. How do I remain myself when circumstances refuse to cooperate? That question has survived because human beings keep encountering it. The technology changes. The nervous system doesn't change nearly as quickly. You still wake up with the same basic fears. You still want to be loved. You still compare yourself with others. You still wonder whether your life matters. You still experience the strange gap between the person you are and the person you think you should be. And technology has found a way to amplify that gap. Social media gives you a window into thousands of carefully edited lives. You see the vacation, not the argument in the hotel room. You see the promotion, not the anxiety that came with it. You see the wedding photographs, not the uncertainty that preceded them. You see the achievement, not the years of private failure. Your brain knows this intellectually. But emotionally, comparison doesn't care. The ancient human brain evolved in small communities where knowing how you ranked socially could have survival value. Now that ancient system can compare itself against millions of people before breakfast. No wonder you feel behind. The problem isn't necessarily that your life is going badly. The problem may be that your mind has been given an impossible scoreboard. And artificial intelligence threatens to make that scoreboard even more extreme. Because now you won't only compare yourself to other humans. You'll compare yourself to machines. A machine that never gets tired. A machine that doesn't need 8 hours of sleep. A machine that doesn't get distracted by childhood memories. A machine that doesn't stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering whether its life has meaning. And perhaps that is exactly the point. The machine doesn't need your humanity, you do. For a long time, we treated our human limitations as defects. We wanted to eliminate boredom, eliminate uncertainty, eliminate mistakes, eliminate waiting, eliminate loneliness, eliminate inconvenience. Technology became a gigantic project to remove friction from existence. And it worked. You can order dinner without speaking to anyone. You can talk to someone on the other side of the planet instantly. You can summon information in seconds. You can ask a machine to draft the email you don't want to write. But there is a strange paradox here. The easier life becomes technologically, the more difficult it can become psychologically. Because friction isn't always the enemy. Sometimes friction creates depth. Waiting can teach patience. Difficulty can create competence. Silence can reveal thoughts you were avoiding. A long conversation can expose parts of yourself you didn't know existed. Failure can force you to discover whether your identity depends on being successful. And boredom, perhaps the most hated experience of modern life, can become the doorway through which original thought enters. If every empty moment is filled by a screen, when does your mind get to wander? When does it connect unrelated ideas? When does it remember what you actually want? When does it hear itself? There is a reason some of humanity's deepest ideas were born in periods when people had far less stimulation than you do. Their minds had room. And room is becoming scarce. Your attention is now one of the most valuable resources on Earth. Entire industries are designed around capturing it. The more emotionally stimulating the content, the easier it is to keep you looking. Outrage works, novelty works, fear works, dotacy works, sex works, conflict works. The human nervous system is remarkably responsive to anything that might signal danger, reward, or social importance. So the algorithm learns what makes you stop. Then it gives you more of it. Eventually, you may begin confusing stimulation with meaning. And that is dangerous, because meaning is often quieter. Meaning may be sitting beside someone you love while neither of you says anything. Meaning may be doing work that nobody applauds. Meaning may be raising a child, caring for an aging parent, making something beautiful that only 10 people ever see, walking through a city alone, reading a difficult book slowly, choosing not to respond to an insult, admitting you were wrong. These things don't necessarily produce dopamine on demand. They produce something else, and depth cannot be rushed. This is why the future may belong to people who can tolerate what technology keeps trying to remove. Uncertainty, silence, difficulty, ambiguity, boredom, and perhaps most importantly, not knowing. There is a strange humility in saying, I don't know. Socrates understood that. The Stoics understood that. Scientists understand it. Children understand it before adults teach them to hide it. But our culture often rewards certainty. The confident person appears competent. The uncertain person appears weak. So we learn to speak with authority even when we are confused. We build identities around opinions. Then we defend those opinions, because changing our minds feels like losing ourselves. Psychology has a name for some of these tendencies: confirmation bias, identity protective reasoning, motivated reasoning. The mind doesn't always search for truth. Sometimes it searches for a version of reality that allows the self to remain intact. And artificial intelligence may expose this weakness in us, because when machines become better at generating arguments, summaries, counter-arguments, and persuasive narratives, the advantage may not go to the person who knows the most. It may go to the person who can recognize when they are being manipulated, including by themselves. That requires self-observation, not self-judgment. Observation, there is a difference. Imagine waking up tomorrow and noticing, for the first time, how often you reach for your phone when you're uncomfortable, not criticizing yourself, just noticing. You feel uncertainty. You feel bored, pawn. You receive a difficult email. You experience loneliness. You don't know what to do next, pawn. Suddenly you realize the device isn't merely entertaining you. It is helping regulate your emotional state. And once you see that, something changes. Not because you deleted an app, because you became aware of the behavior. Awareness creates distance. And distance creates choice. That may sound simple, but it is one of the most profound things a human being can develop. The ability to notice a thought without automatically obeying it, to feel anger without becoming anger, to experience fear without letting fear write the entire story, to recognize envy without turning it into resentment, to feel the desire for approval without building your life around receiving it. The machine may become extraordinarily intelligent, but your ability to witness your own mind is a different kind of capacity. And perhaps the future will make that capacity more important, not less. Because when answers become cheap, questions become valuable. When content becomes infinite, attention becomes precious. When machines become better at producing things, taste becomes more important. When information becomes abundant, judgment matters more. When careers become unstable, identity becomes more important. And when external systems become increasingly powerful, knowing what you stand for becomes essential. This doesn't mean everyone needs to become a monk. It doesn't mean technology is evil. It doesn't mean you should throw away your phone and move into a cabin in the woods. Technology is one of humanity's greatest expressions of creativity. The question is not whether you use it. The question is whether you know what you are using it for. A hammer is useful. But if every problem looks like a nail, the hammer has quietly become your worldview. And the same thing can happen with AI. If you use it to remove every moment of uncertainty, you may become less capable of thinking through uncertainty yourself. If you use it to write every difficult message, you may lose some ability to navigate emotional complexity. If you use it to generate every idea before you struggle with your own, you may never discover what your mind can produce after the easy answers disappear. The goal isn't to reject assistance. It is to remain the author of your life. That distinction matters. Because your life is not a resume. It is not a productivity dashboard. It is not a competition against every person you can find online. And it certainly isn't an IQ test. There will always be someone smarter than you. Someone faster. Someone younger. Someone more attractive. Someone richer. Someone more accomplished. The internet has made it possible to meet all of them before you've even finished your coffee. But none of that answers the question that ultimately follows you into the quiet moments. Who are you becoming? That question is much harder, because there is no universal score. No algorithm can tell you whether you are becoming more patient, more honest, more courageous, more compassionate, more awake. You have to watch yourself. And that requires something our culture doesn't always reward: time. When was the last time you sat with yourself long enough to discover what you actually believe, rather than what you had recently consumed? Not what your feed told you to care about, not what your coworkers care about, not what your parents expected, not what would make you look impressive. What do you care about when nobody is watching? That question can be uncomfortable, because sometimes the life we are chasing was never actually ours. Sometimes we inherited the definition of success before we were old enough to question it. We were told to get good grades, then get into a good school, then get a good job, then earn more, then buy more, then retire. And somewhere along the way, a quiet voice asks, "This it?" That voice isn't necessarily depression. It isn't necessarily failure. Sometimes it is consciousness. Sometimes something inside you is realizing that achievement and meaning are not interchangeable. Nietzsche understood that a person can become imprisoned, not only by external authorities, but by inherited values. Jung, in a different way, explored the danger of living according to an image of yourself, rather than encountering the deeper parts of your psyche. And existentialist thinkers kept returning to a frightening freedom. If there is no predetermined script for your life, then you have to participate in creating its meaning. That can feel terrifying. But it can also be liberating, because it means you don't have to win someone else's game. The future may make this freedom unavoidable. If machines increasingly perform the tasks that once gave people status, we may be forced to confront a question we have postponed for generations. What are human beings for? Not economically, existentially. What are we for when productivity is no longer the center of our identity? What happens when your value cannot be defended by saying, "But look how much I can produce"? Maybe we rediscover relationship. Maybe we rediscover craftsmanship. Maybe we rediscover contemplation. Maybe we become better parents, friends, citizens, artists, caregivers, explorers. Maybe we learn that a meaningful life was never supposed to be a machine running at maximum capacity. Maybe the point was never maximum output. Maybe it was experience, content, understanding, love, presence. The strange thing is that none of these qualities are particularly efficient. Love is inefficient. Friendship is inefficient. Grief is inefficient. Art is inefficient. A conversation that lasts 3 hours and changes nothing on paper may change everything inside you. A walk with someone you love produces no measurable economic output. Holding someone's hand while they are afraid does not improve your resume. But ask the person who needed that hand whether it mattered. This is the mistake we make when we reduce human value to measurable performance. We measure what is easy to measure. Then we begin believing that what is measurable is what matters. It isn't. Some of the most important things in your life resist measurement. The trust between two people, the feeling of being understood, the courage it took to start over, the private decision not to become bitter. The moment you realized your father was human. The moment your child looked at you and trusted you completely. The morning you finally forgave yourself for something you had carried for 10 years. No machine needs to understand why those moments matter. You do. And perhaps that is where the future becomes less frightening. Because the rise of intelligent machines doesn't necessarily mean the end of human significance. It may force us to stop pretending that significance comes from being the smartest thing in the room. For thousands of years, humanity climbed a ladder. First we mastered our environment, then we built machines, then we built computers. Now we are building systems that can increasingly perform forms of intellectual work. And perhaps the next step isn't climbing higher. Perhaps it is turning inward, understanding attention, understanding emotion, understanding consciousness, understanding the stories we tell ourselves, understanding why we chase things that don't make us happy, understanding why we fear losing identities that were never truly ours, understanding how to live with uncertainty without becoming numb. That is not a step backward. It may be the next frontier. And there is something strangely hopeful about it. Because if the future doesn't need you to be the smartest person alive, you are free from an impossible competition. You don't have to outrun the machine. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to become superhuman. You have to become more fully human. That doesn't mean becoming perfect. In fact, it may mean becoming more comfortable with imperfection. You will still make mistakes. You will still get jealous. You will still lose your temper. You will still procrastinate. You will still misunderstand people you love. You will still have days when you feel completely lost. The goal isn't to eliminate those experiences. It is to become conscious enough that they don't secretly run your life. There is a difference between having a weakness and being unconscious of it. A weakness you can see can become something you work with. A weakness you cannot see becomes a hidden architect of your future. So perhaps the most valuable skill in the coming decades will not be knowing how to command machines. It will be knowing when to listen to them, when to question them, and when to put them away. It will be knowing your own mind well enough to recognize when convenience is costing you depth. It will be knowing what you believe before an algorithm tells you what to believe. It will be knowing what kind of life you want before a marketplace tells you what to want. And it will be knowing the difference between being alone and being disconnected from yourself. Because the future will become increasingly loud. More information, more intelligence, more predictions, more personalization, more entertainment, more optimization, more ways to avoid sitting quietly with the question you have been carrying for years. And in a world like that, the ability to become quiet may become radical, to stop, to notice, to breathe, to look at the person across from you instead of the screen, to listen without preparing your response, to read something slowly, to admit you don't know,